Hi, I am Thomas Legrand, and this is Compassionate Las Vegas, the podcast.
Welcome to Compassionate Las Vegas, the podcast. I'm your host, Will Rucker, and today we are taking part two of our, so far it's been amazing, our conversation with Thomas Legrand. I'm going to mess that up every time, but I'm doing my best French accent because I just love the language. But we've talked about so much already, so if you didn't see episode 1, you've got to go back and watch that. But I want to pick up and start where we left off on the last episode, where we're talking about generations and kids and how we can really transform culture by investing in our children.
Yeah, definitely. So, as I was saying, this is, we need a cultural evolution, and it's easier, a big part of it will just come through a new generation. But we also need to be able to make space for their new values to express themselves, right? So that means each of us has also to, do the work and collectively also to understand what are the good aspects of our personalities, of our ways of being in our communities, and the more, we could call it negative or just say like they are not that adapted to, and they are creating some problems. So we need to be able to look inside of us and be able to change in order to welcome new positive values that new generations may bring.
Yeah, I love that. Welcome the new values new generations bring. I consider myself a young man. I'm not anymore, and I'm coming to accept it. I'm dealing with it. And I see so much happening with people who are truly young people, their use of technology, their creativity, just the way that they view life and the world. It is so amazing to me. But I love to use the example of a bathtub. And I take baths just about every day and soak just because I need to de-stress, just release, the challenges of the day and whatnot. But what I see with a bathtub is you can have water in there, and if it's dirty or, you've got soap in it or whatever that may be, you can add new water and it doesn't fundamentally change. Over time, if you keep that water running, eventually, you get new water in there, but that residue and that memory still kind of lingers. What are some of the things we can do to ensure that as the seasoned generation, we're not stifling this evolution of young people in their values and their quest to be a being-centered people? How do we ensure we're not tarnishing them?
So you say you feel you're not, seems you feel young inside.
I feel young inside.
Exactly.
It's just
so that's the
reality.
point. Maybe, so you are truly young. It's not only about your age. It's about how do you feel inside. So if you're able to be, to change, to evolve, to refresh yourselves, etc., you keep being young, no? And you make space inside of you for these kind of new ideas, new ways of being to express themselves in you, right? So how do we make space for something new? I think it's through introspection, looking inside, and I think we need to recognize that there is a lot of healing to be done. What I'm saying is that traumas, healing traumas, is a gateway to being. So the whole point of the book is being is just natural, is a natural aspiration. And when healthy people do naturally good. So it's just very simple, right? But we are not able to get this so easy because we're just used to other ways. and we need to do that work of healing, looking at our past, looking at maybe, I know that the US is facing more and more, its own past in terms of slavery, for example, or other types of exploitation. And that is a very important work, only, making peace with the past, understanding, what has happened and what has been the consequences up to date, can we really be able to change.
So healing trauma is really the gateway to this politics of being.
To being, exactly.
Oh my goodness.
Being is a natural way, and our societies could be much more collaborative and much more effective if there would not be all these kind of traumas on the way.
Do you say that everyone has trauma?
There are different types of traumas. Some are the ones that we have experienced in this life. Some are the ones that our ancestors have experienced. And I would say, in our DNA, there are information that comes from thousands, or tens of thousands of years. And they are from human beings, but even from the whole history of life on Earth. So there is a lot of things that we can experience, but that is not really our true essence.
So trauma isn't our true essence, but we can heal it and we can learn from it.
Exactly. And even it can be, when it is integrated, I hope it can be, all the difficulties can be experienced as bringing something positive, because it's an invitation to go deeper and to overcome these difficulties. At the end, can bring about a lot of good to everyone.
I think that's beautiful. And I think that's an important idea to highlight, for sure. I want to kind of take this a slightly different route, because we've got the trauma aspect, and there's a book, What Happened to You, that Oprah Winfrey has been promoting, and she's part of it. And she's saying, change the question from what's wrong with you to what's happened to you.
Exactly.
I also want to take this from a different angle and saying, what can we learn from you? Because I think our ancestors have such a wisdom and a grace that if we really accept it, it does transform us into a new and modern way, even with the ancient wisdom. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first on what you say, moving from what's wrong with you to what happened to you. So that's exactly what I mean. Our nature is in general positive and is relational. But because it's not because we are wrong, it's because something happened. So if we're able to heal this, we can have tap on our good human nature to shape how we interact as societies, as communities. You were talking about the wisdom of our ancestors. I think this is very important. Cultural evolution, science says, is past dependent. So where you're going depends from where you're coming from, and how much you have, I would say, integrated all the lessons of your history, right? And so that means also reconnecting to our traditional wisdom. Now the world, is evolving so fast, and I feel often we've just a little bit lost track about our history, the history of our ancestors. And that's why sometimes, people stick to very rigid identity because they feel threatened, right? So I think we need really to acknowledge that and, pay attention to discuss, reflect what has happened to us, what has happened to ancestors, and how it shapes where we are now. And I would say for many societies, it's also reconnecting to the spiritual part and to the traditional wisdom. And I've been, one of the discovery in the research I did for this book was to realize how much traditional wisdoms in different places is similar. And for example, Ubuntu says, I am because you are. So that's a relational understanding of our human nature. And you find that very same thing in many different cultures. And often they have one word to say it. In the Philippines, for example, it's kapwa. It's the same kind of understanding. From where I live, with next to this meditation practice center of Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh, is a very famous teacher that has first coined the word interbeing. So that is a Buddhist vision of relationality, right? So all these traditional wisdom tend to converge, and for a good reason, is that communities can only sustain themselves if their members are responsible and they acknowledge their duties, their responsibility toward their communities, which can be also the land, can be also the ancestors, etc. But we really need to understand our interdependence and, how much relationships are important.
Yeah, I love all of those words. The entire concept for me is big. All of the interconnected, interrelated, intersectional, all of those things, I think, are leading us to this path of being. And I even love the words used, relationality. I think that's beautiful. And spirituality. I think all of it really is trying to direct us to the same way of being, which is recognizing, as you said, the Ubuntu, I am because you are because I am. And helping people to let go of those defense mechanisms where we build up this wall between us and we again try and reinforce this illusion of separation. If we help people through that with grace and with compassion, I see us going just, there's no limit to where we can end up when we actually do this thing together. Again, you mentioned spirituality. Could you just kind of help us understand your perspective on what that is?
I think spirituality, I would say, is science, practice, and art of self-transformation, or towards expressing our true nature, who we really are. And, mystics from many different traditions have more or less all had the same ultimate experience, which is that of unity with all that is. Or in Buddhist, we could say interbeing, in Buddhist terms. Oneness. And if you feel you're one with everything, that means you experience also the suffering of everything as your own suffering, and then compassion is born.
Yeah.
So that, I think, is the basis of pro-sociality. So our willingness to serve, to support the common good. And science tells us that's also a good part of what makes a human being happy. So we can really reconcile our own happiness and dealing with environmental and social crises we are facing. So that's really the good news and a positive narrative for the way forward in this new paradigm of being. If you're coming from the old paradigm of having, you will have at some point to recognize that, there are some limits to natural resources, to the environmental limits. So at some point, you were just saying there is no limit to being, right? To how we can grow as human beings. So that's a real development. We will be inhabiting more and more a world that is physically constrained, environmentally constrained. So we'll have to redefine what progress is. And the good news that we recognize that what we thought progress was economic development. It's a good thing, but it's only a mean towards an end. The real progress is about becoming who we are.
Redefining progress. That's so big. And the reason I ask about the spirituality piece, and I love the way that you define it and the way that you include arts, and it's just fantastic. I'm just thrilled to be having this conversation. But I think that spirituality really is integral to having this politics of being and being able to redefine what it is we define as progress. We've done great at building wealth. I don't know that we've done as well with building people. And so we see the character of individuals declining. I think that morality has even become kind of a taboo idea. And I think we really need to invest in bringing morality back to the front in the value sense, not in a legalistic, harmful way, but in a way that says, do you care about others? Should you be generous? Should you have the value of compassion and integrity? Does it make sense for us to have wealth hoarded in one area while there are folks without homes in another, or without food? And I think all of that works together, and it starts again with just letting these barriers go and the healing that you talk about. What do you see as the number one way to develop that character, develop spirituality, to enter into being?
I think we need to recognize that morality should not be so much something imposed from the outside, from society to individuals, but rather to recognize that healthy, happy, I would even say, individuals are often the ones behaving more morally because of our true nature, which is relational, which is interbeing. So the more we cultivate, this sense of interbeing, the more we are closer to what we truly are. And we need all the politics of being is basically the idea. I mean, the methodology about it. How was I able to identify, the solutions? Is coming from the study of the highest human values that have become subjects of science in the last decades and that have entered the field of politics and social change. So, for example, you're part of Compassionate Las Vegas, right? So there is now a science of compassion, right? And that science can tell us how to cultivate compassion in societies. Well, it's the same for happiness. It's the same for peace. It's we know also how to cultivate, this sense of interdependence. People, working on how we bring more system thinking, complex thinking, integral thinking into many aspects of our social lives. We know how to cultivate life in us and life outside of us, how nature works, how we are part of it, how we can feel connected to nature, and how this can nourish our physical health, mental health, wellness, etc. So all these are what I'm proposing basically is to redesign all societies based on spiritual values, or you could call them the highest human values. And that is philosophically very sound. Platon has defined the good societies as being founded upon truth, goodness, and beauty. So I'm talking the same. I'm talking about happiness, love, peace, mindfulness, etc. So it's really the same. Even Hegel was saying, the nature of the human mind is freedom, and development for society is allowing human beings to express this freedom. I'm not talking about, sometimes I feel in the US there is a little bit a narrow vision of what freedom is like. I think there it's important to go back, to our spiritual roots and, for example, reflect on the words of Jesus, truth will make you free. Okay, is that, what is the freedom we're talking about?
Your wisdom is just, in this space, it's almost tangible, very, very beautiful. You mentioned happiness frequently, And happiness is one of my favorite things, right? I think we all want to be happy. And I know that in my experience, a lot of individuals equate financial stability with happiness. And in your work, you do talk about the correlation, but that there tends to be a plateau with that happiness factor. What would you say for an individual that, how would you help to reframe that idea for an individual where economic progress doesn't always lead to increased happiness? How do you help them understand that?
So the studies are clear, and maybe people can just open the eyes and see around them, I think that's what I've done also when I was young, just looking around. And do you believe like the wealthiest people around you are the happiest one, right? And it's just not true. I see, from the outside, I see it's true that the US is an economic superpower, right? But I feel like this is because everybody is running after money. So it's not so much about, enjoying it, but it's really because people are forced to run after money that the economic systems is doing well. So people are not the goal. The goal is to keep. They are rather used by the system to keep growing. And to me, you said now people feel good when they are having money. I think part of it is probably what we were talking about when we were talking about traumas, because people in this society probably feel much more insecure. Coming from Europe, we have much more social support, right? And there is much more equality. So people don't feel that their life depends so much about how much money they are making. They are more secured, and then they will then see their lives differently, prioritize more their self-expression than trying to feel safe. That is moving from survival to self-expression in a way.
That's freedom.
Yeah.
That exactly. To me is true freedom.
And so that's a good example when you say that's freedom. We were talking at the beginning about how we change the value. So freedom is an important value for the American people, and I think that's great. But there's a deeper meaning to freedom, right? So you can't keep, being yourself as American and honoring, having a special interest for freedom. But you need a deeper understanding of what that means, and maybe it can lead you to completely different conclusions.
Oh yeah. This comes full circle with, again, the title of the book, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But politics of being. That's why the policies are so important, because what I'm hearing from you and what I'm even just kind of having my aha moment in this conversation is it's the system, it's the structures, it's the way that we've designed our society that is actually impeding our happiness and is a barrier to our well-being because we've prioritized things other than people. Mm-hmm. Is that a fair assessment, would you say? Yeah, completely. So you have to understand that the having mode has its own logic and the being mode has its own logic. And what we need is really a change of paradigm. When you face a problem, you can say, for example, students don't behave at school. From one paradigm, you say, okay, it's because there are not enough punishment, there is not enough discipline, there is not enough authority. That's one mindset. And from another mindset is just, okay, maybe they are coming to the school with emotional problem, then they need to, as we saw in that compassionate school in Las Vegas, they need some mindfulness practice in the morning to just relax and calm down, or because their own needs are not recognized because the teachers may not be kind enough, so it's a completely different logic. One logic can function, but at some point it reaches some limitations and we need to switch to another logic. Yeah. And I want to circle back to a couple of things. So many pieces I want to pull out. But earlier you just mentioned, and I think it's an important distinction, there's no limit to human being. There is a limit to human having. Exactly. But on this piece, what I'm hearing is the difference between retributive justice and restorative justice. And I think that when people hear it framed in the way that you've just outlined, it makes it so much more accessible and less scary. I was doing a ride along with our outstanding Metro Police Department this week, and I just was impressed, to be honest with you. I was very impressed with who I was riding with, and I got to meet several of the officers and see them in action. But one thing that I didn't see was a moment for mindfulness. One thing I didn't see in their briefing, because they start their day together in a briefing and go over, if there's an incident or something they have to address or a training, they do that, but they just kind of dive in. There's no pause. There's no, let's take a moment to breathe through this. And then even after they see this footage that could be very traumatizing, some of them were literally in the footage, there was no moment to let that go and to release it. So what happens is it becomes repressed instead of healed. And I love that school starts with that day. We're going to take a moment for mindfulness. Even kids get this. We got to take a moment to actually process. And I think that would help us in this change from having to being.
Exactly. And mindfulness is one of the dimension that is being applied to many sectors. It's kind of, to me, it's like a medicine flowing in a sick social body to be able to regenerate a lot of professions and systems. So in the case of, you mentioned about policemen, there have been great projects to teach mindfulness to police officers, and it's very important because it's a very stressful profession, and and the stress tends to accumulate. And if you don't have a neuroscience, is very clear about that. So your cortisol, for example, the hormone of stress, is rising, and is rising often, as is the case of policemen during the day. If it has not the time to come back, then it becomes, their kind of new level, and that exhausts their body. It's also, mindfulness is also the capacity to stop, to be able to respond. That's freedom, rather than to react. And that's one of the most important capacity for a police officer, right?
Mm-hmm. I love the theme that I hear emerging in this conversation, which is a higher level of freedom. Mm-hmm. Because everything that we're talking about is really expanding our freedom. And you think about some of these tools, mindfulness, in dealing with physical ailments, that's less expensive than some of this pharmacy stuff we've been doing. It's less expensive than surgery. And restorative justice is less expensive than retributive justice. And providing kids space to play is less expensive than dealing with all of the corrections that have to come. And you can get a lot more done with less economically if you transition into this paradigm that you're talking about. So, I could talk to you all day. I really, really could. But I want to get into your book. So where can people find your book? How do they get in touch with you? Just give us the whole spiel.
Sure. So that's a book, Politics of Being, Wisdom and Science for a New Development Paradigm. So there is a website, www.politicsofbeing.com, where you have all the links to the different platforms, including Amazon, where you can find the book. And I'm on social media, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. So welcome, and just want to comment, I think, what you say, that now we have the rational, the evidence that it has become so clear that's where where we need to go. And this is because the time is now. And because we have been so much in the other direction, that the benefits that we can get to switching to the other mode are huge.
Yeah. And I want to comment on the book, because this isn't something you just threw together overnight. It took you 10 years to write this book. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. I've spent 10 years to work on this book, and I was always asking my wife, especially when I come to, the insight that leads to simplicity, clarity, etc. And I was saying, I don't know why no one has yet written this book. In 2000, the Earth Charter was published. Some say it was one of the most discussed documents in the history of humanity. And it says, when basic needs have been met, development is primarily about being more rather than having more. To me, that's the most fundamental question of our time. how we can do this transition. By doing this, by investing in being instead of having, we'll be able to do the cultural evolution and the shift of consciousness that is so needed right now.
Yeah. Our planet is a finite, limited place. We only have so much resource here, and we have to learn to live within the bounds of this planetary home. And I think your book helps us to get there. So I want to close with a few questions, and I just want you to finish the statements here. And I'll give you, a couple words, and then you, whatever pops, don't overthink it, but just say whatever comes to mind. All right. Happiness is
relationships.
Love matters because
it is what we are.
I was not ready for that answer. Oh my gosh. Yes, it is what and who we are. The right thing right now is
being.
Being is
interbeing.
Elaborate.
Well, that's why I was saying, the fundamental nature that some of the great mystics from many different traditions have experienced is that sense of unity, that sense of oneness, that in the Buddhist tradition, according to Zen master Thich Nhat, we call interbeing. And just a recognition that I'm Thomas, what Thomas is made of my ancestors, is made of my education, is made of my friends, is made of the book I'm reading, is made of the place where I've been. So it's all about I'm interbeing with all these different aspects, and I need to recognize that, and this is freedom.
Warm fuzzies. I'm buzzing with that. I love that. Being is interbeing. Couple more. Compassion is
Our essence.
I am.
Because you are.
Love it. Well, Thomas, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I have enjoyed this so immensely. And again, I've got the book, so I feel like I can call you up via the book anytime and have this conversation. But I'm just grateful for your being and for you choosing to come to Las Vegas and impart into our city, for joining the podcast, for our global audience, and just for having the courage to say what you're saying.
Realize that maybe I'm quite a free person, even professionally, and that allows me also to say the things like very upfront, because I don't have a career agenda. So I think I'm quite free to say the things, and even I've had I guess a deep spiritual journey, and I use spiritual language, but I also use a lot of science. So I don't shy away for both, and I think both have a lot to bring to to help us think the new stage of our evolution as societies.
Beautiful. This has been Compassionate Las Vegas, the podcast. I'm your host, Will Rucker, and as I always remind you, you are not just a drop in the ocean. You are the entire ocean in a drop, and what you do matters. So live compassionately. I'll see you next time.